The rancher made an unexpected joke. The young Apache woman couldn't hold his gaze. Golden rays of light stretched across the landscape, turning the tall grasses and rolling hills into a soft, glowing sea. On one side of the plains, a ranch stood, strong and steady. It was a place full of history, with wooden fences that had weathered many seasons, barns that smelled of hay and horses, and the soft lowing of cattle echoing through the morning air. This ranch had been in the same family for generations. Its owner, a middle-aged rancher named Samuel, had grown up here. Every board, every fence post, and every inch of the land carried a memory for him. Samuel was a man of few words, the kind of person who let his actions speak louder than any sentence. He wore a wide-brimmed hat to protect himself from the blazing sun, and his hands were calloused from years of hard work. His face was tanned and lined, showing both the joy and struggle of a life lived outdoors. He loved the ranch, not just because it was his home, but because it connected him to the land in a way that nothing else ever could. Every morning, he would rise before the sun, check on the animals, and make sure everything on the ranch was in order. He knew each cow, each horse, and even each fence post by sight. This knowledge had taken years to gain, and he took pride in it quietly, without boasting. On this particular morning, Samuel moved carefully along the edge of the pasture, checking the fence line. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of wildflowers and dry earth. There was a calmness to the ranch at this hour, a peacefulness that made him feel connected to something larger than himself. As he walked, he noticed a figure in the distance, moving slowly but with purpose. At first, he thought it might be one of the ranch hands, but as she got closer, he realized it was someone entirely different. She was a young Apache woman, dressed in simple clothing suitable for walking through the fields. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and her eyes carried a quiet determination. She moved gracefully, but cautiously, as though she was both curious and careful about being in unfamiliar territory. Samuel watched her for a moment, intrigued. Visitors were rare here, and it wasn't often that someone approached the ranch with no introduction. The young woman was collecting herbs and plants from the wild grasses. She moved with knowledge and care, bending to examine leaves and flowers as she gathered them. There was a rhythm to her movements, a familiarity with the land that reminded Samuel of his own connection to the ranch. He could tell that she respected the earth and understood how to take from it without causing harm. He admired that quietly from afar, appreciating her skill and patience. Eventually, their eyes met. Samuel felt a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. The young woman's gaze was steady but not challenging. It was observant and thoughtful. She seemed to be studying him just as he was studying her, trying to understand who he was and what this place meant. There was a moment of silence between them, filled only by the sounds of the morning, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of grass in the breeze, and the soft chirping of birds. It was a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement of each other's presence. Samuel decided to approach her slowly, not wanting to startle her. He raised a hand in greeting, his expression softening. "Good morning," he said in a low, calm voice. The young woman nodded politely, her eyes flicking down to the ground for a brief moment before returning to his. There was a small, shy smile on her lips, a hint of friendliness beneath the cautious exterior. They began to talk, cautiously at first. She introduced herself as Ayana, explaining that she had come to the area to learn more about the land and its ways. She wanted to understand how ranchers cared for their cattle and maintained their fields, hoping to combine that knowledge with her own traditions of working with plants and herbs. Samuel listened carefully, impressed by her curiosity and the thoughtfulness in her questions. He realized that she wasn't just a visitor, she was genuinely interested in learning and understanding. Over the next hour, they walked along the fence line together. Samuel showed her how he inspected the posts and wires, explaining why each detail mattered. Yana asked questions, sometimes pausing to examine a knot in the rope or the way the wire was stretched across the posts. Samuel was patient, answering every question with care. He noticed the way her eyes lit up when she understood something new, and he felt a quiet respect for her eagerness to learn. As they worked together, Samuel found himself talking more than he usually did. He told her stories about the ranch, how his grandfather had built the first barn, how his father had taught him to ride and care for the cattle, and how each season brought its own challenges and rewards. Yana listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification. She shared bits of her own experiences too, explaining how her people had lived on the land for generations, learning from the plants, animals, and seasons. Samuel was fascinated by her perspective. It was different from his own, yet there were similarities that connected their experiences. By the time the sun was high in the sky, they had covered a lot of ground. Samuel noticed that Ayanna seemed comfortable now, her earlier caution replaced by curiosity and engagement. She laughed softly at one of his jokes about a particularly stubborn cow, and he felt a small sense of satisfaction. He wasn't used to visitors, especially ones who stayed interested in the details rather than just passing through. There was a sense of connection forming, subtle but undeniable, based on shared work and mutual respect. When they paused for a break under the shade of a large mesquite tree, Samuel offered her some water from his canteen. She accepted with gratitude, and for a moment they sat in companionable silence. The breeze carried the scent of dry earth and wildflowers, and the world seemed calm and expansive around them. Samuel realized that this encounter was more than just a casual visit. It was a meeting of minds and hearts, a moment that would be remembered long after the day was over. As they prepared to continue, Samuel felt a new sense of anticipation. He was usually content with the quiet rhythms of ranch life, but Ayanna's presence brought a fresh perspective. He looked at her and saw intelligence, curiosity, and a respect for the land that mirrored his own. There was a subtle tension, not uncomfortable but present, a feeling that something meaningful was beginning, something that neither of them could fully define yet. The morning passed quickly. By the time Ayanna prepared to leave, she had learned a great deal about the ranch, and Samuel had learned as much from her about patience, observation, and the subtle knowledge of the land that came from living close to it. They parted with a simple nod and a shared understanding that this was only the beginning of their acquaintance. The plains stretched out before them, vast and full of possibilities, and the sunlight continued to pour over the land, warm and unchanging. Samuel watched her walk away, feeling a mixture of curiosity and quiet admiration. He knew that their paths might cross again, but even if they didn't, this encounter had already left a mark. It was a reminder of the unexpected ways people could connect, and how a simple meeting could open doors to new understanding. As he returned to his work, he felt a renewed appreciation for the ranch, the land, and the moments of connection that made life rich and meaningful. The sun was high now, casting long shadows across the ranch. The morning had passed with the quiet rhythm of work, and Samuel was busy fixing a broken fence post near the edge of the pasture. The boards had weathered many storms, and one had finally given way under the strain of wind and rain. He knelt down, examining the post, tapping it with his hammer, and muttering to himself about how nothing ever lasted forever. It was the kind of work he had done countless times, but every repair still carried a sense of responsibility. The fence was more than wood and wire. It was what kept his cattle safe, what kept his land organized, what kept his ranch running smoothly. Jana walked slowly toward him, her basket of herbs swaying gently on her arm. She had spent the morning collecting plants and making notes about their uses. The more time she spent on the ranch, the more she realized how much she could learn from someone who had lived and worked on this land all his life. Her respect for Samuel had grown, not just because of his skill, but because of the quiet way he handled everything. He didn't rush, he didn't complain, and he had a calmness that was rare. "Good morning again," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough for him to hear. Samuel looked up from the fence post and offered a small nod. "Morning. Come to watch me work, or are you looking for more plants?" Gianna smiled faintly, feeling a small rush of warmth at the way he spoke. There was something unassuming about him, something that made it easy to feel at ease even though they had only just met. "A little of both," she replied. "I want to see how you do things here. It helps me understand more about the land." Samuel chuckled quietly, a low, pleasant sound that seemed out of place at first but quickly felt natural. "Well, it's not magic, just a bit of patience and a lot of elbow grease." She stepped closer, careful not to disturb the fence. She watched as he measured the post, hammered it carefully into place, and checked the wire tension. There was a rhythm to his movements, a quiet skill that came from years of practice. Gianna admired it, noting in her mind how different it was from her own work with herbs, which required gentleness and attention to subtle signs in the plants. Here, everything was bigger, heavier, and yet handled with the same care. As he straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow, Samuel glanced at her and grinned. "You know, I've been doing this for years, and I still manage to drop a hammer on my own foot now and then." Gianna blinked, caught off guard. She had expected him to be serious, practical, perhaps even a little stern, but not this humor. Her lips twitched as she tried to suppress a smile, her eyes lowering briefly as a soft laugh escaped her. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, an unfamiliar feeling that made her heart beat a little faster. Samuel noticed, of course, and his grin widened just a little, enjoying the small effect his words had caused. He tapped the hammer lightly on the fence post again. "I suppose I should warn you. If you stay around, you might see me stumble more than once. I promise I won't hurt the cattle or myself too badly." Gianna shook her head, unable to keep the smile from spreading now. "You're funny," she admitted, though she couldn't meet his gaze fully. Her eyes flicked down to the ground, then back to the fence, then somewhere in between. She wasn't used to this type of humor from strangers, and yet it felt easy, almost comforting. Samuel laughed softly, a sound that blended with the breeze and the distant lowing of the cattle. "Funny, huh? I guess I have my moments. Not usually the kind that get much attention, though." He straightened fully, brushing his hands on his pants. "Mostly I just work. The land keeps me busy enough." For a while, they worked in silence, each focused on their own tasks but aware of the other's presence. Gianna examined the fence posts, the wire, and the tools with a mixture of curiosity and careful attention. She asked questions occasionally, about why the fence was set up in a certain way or how he knew which posts would last and which wouldn't. Samuel answered each question patiently, explaining the reasoning behind each step. He showed her how to test the wood for weakness, how to tie knots that would hold under tension, and how to read the land to know where cattle might wander. As the morning wore on, their conversation became easier. Gianna shared stories about her people, explaining how certain plants were used for medicine or ritual, and Samuel listened with genuine interest. There was a quiet respect growing between them, an understanding that neither needed to force conversation but could still connect through shared knowledge and curiosity. At one point, Samuel leaned on his hammer and looked out across the fields. "You know," he said, "sometimes it feels like the land talks to you. Not with words, of course, but in the way the grass bends, the way the wind moves, the way the cattle behave. You have to listen or you'll miss it." Gianna nodded thoughtfully. "That's very similar to what my people say. The land has a voice if you are willing to hear it." She hesitated, then added softly, "I feel like I am starting to hear it more clearly here." Samuel glanced at her, impressed by the insight and the connection she made between their worlds. "Well, you're a quick learner, maybe faster than me at times," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Then, without warning, he made another joke. "Although I doubt anyone could teach me how to stop dropping hammers on my feet, that seems to be a lifelong skill of mine." Yana laughed this time, the sound lighter and more confident than before. She couldn't help but cover her mouth briefly, glancing down again because the intensity of the moment caught her off guard. The humor was unexpected, and it created a strange, delightful tension. She realized that she didn't know how to look at him without feeling the flutter of something unfamiliar, a mix of admiration, curiosity, and maybe a hint of embarrassment. Samuel noticed her reaction and chuckled quietly, enjoying the subtle effect of his words. There was no malice, no intention to embarrass, only a shared moment of levity. And yet, the way she looked away made him realize how different this encounter was from any he had experienced before. He had met many people over the years, but rarely someone whose presence made him pause and consider more than just the task at hand. The rest of the morning passed in a similar rhythm, with work, conversation, and small jokes that broke the tension in delightful ways. Samuel found himself talking more openly than he usually did, sharing stories about his youth, his family, and the times he had struggled with both the land and himself. Yana listened intently, asking questions and offering insights from her own perspective. Each moment built a subtle bond, a growing understanding that went beyond words. By midday, they stopped for a short break under the shade of a cottonwood tree. Samuel offered her water from his canteen again, and she accepted with a nod and a quiet smile. They sat together, comfortable in the shared silence, feeling the warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze. Yana noticed how the ranch seemed to come alive under Samuel's care, how every detail mattered, and how his knowledge was not just practical but also deeply personal. As they rested, she realized that this brief encounter had already changed something in her. She felt a connection to the ranch, to Samuel, and to the rhythm of life here that was unfamiliar but welcome. It was a lesson in patience, in observation, and in the small, unexpected moments that could make life richer. Samuel, too, felt the shift. He was used to working alone or with people who came and went without leaving a mark, but Ayana's presence was different. Her curiosity, respect, and quiet strength made him consider things in new ways. He realized that sometimes a simple joke, a shared laugh, or a brief glance could open the door to understanding, trust, and even friendship. When it was time to continue, they returned to their tasks, but there was a sense of ease between them now. The initial tension had eased, replaced by subtle warmth, respect, and curiosity. Samuel felt a small spark of anticipation for the days to come, while Ayana felt a quiet confidence that she was learning not just about ranching, but about connection, trust, and the unexpected joys of meeting someone who shared her respect for the land. By the time the afternoon sun began its slow descent, both of them were tired but satisfied. The fence was repaired, the cattle were secure, and the herbs collected by Yana filled her basket. They paused to look out over the ranch, taking in the vast expanse of fields, hills, and skies. There was a quiet understanding between them, unspoken but strong, that this day had been the beginning of something meaningful. As she prepared to leave, Ayana felt a sense of gratitude. The rancher, with his humor and patience, had shown her more than she expected. And Samuel, watching her walk away, realized that life sometimes brought unexpected moments of connection, laughter, and understanding that were as valuable as any work done on the land. The next few days at the ranch were filled with a quiet, steady rhythm. The morning sun rose over the vast plains, spreading golden light across the fields, and Samuel was already at work. The cattle needed tending, the fences needed checking, and the ranch demanded constant care. Yet these days were different from any he had experienced in a long time. Ayana had returned, carrying her basket of herbs and curiosity, and the ranch suddenly felt fuller, livelier, and richer in ways he hadn't expected. Yana approached the ranch early, moving with her usual grace and attentiveness. She greeted Samuel with a soft, respectful nod, and he returned it with a warm smile. They had begun to establish a quiet routine. She would arrive in the morning, sometimes bringing questions about the cattle or the land, and he would guide her through the work, showing her the small details that made ranching more than just physical labor. One morning, Samuel led her toward a section of the pasture where the youngest calves were kept. "These little ones need watching," he explained. "They're curious and sometimes a bit too bold. You have to be gentle but firm with them." Iana nodded, observing how he interacted with the animals. His voice was calm and steady, but his movements were quick and sure. He reached down to gently guide a calf that had wandered too close to the fence, speaking to it as if it could understand his words. Iana smiled softly at the interaction. There was a quiet kindness in Samuel that extended beyond the land and the animals. It reached the people around him too. As they worked together, Samuel began to share small pieces of his own story. He spoke of his childhood on the ranch, how he had learned to ride horses before he could even walk properly, and how he had spent countless hours alone in the fields, learning the rhythm of the land. Iana listened closely, fascinated not just by his experiences but by the way he spoke about them, with respect, humility, and love. "It's amazing how much you can learn from just being patient and paying attention," she said quietly. Samuel looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. "Patience is everything here, and paying attention isn't just about seeing what's in front of you. It's about noticing what isn't there yet, the weak fence post, the sick calf, the wind that will change direction. The land tells you all these things if you're willing to listen." Iana nodded slowly, understanding more than just the words. She could see the truth in what he said. The land did speak, not in words but in signs, movements, and subtle shifts. She felt a deep connection to the way Samuel observed and responded to it, realizing that even though their knowledge came from different traditions, it was rooted in the same respect for nature and life. Over the following days, they spent hours together tending to the ranch. Iana learned how to check the fences, identify weak spots, and understand the behavior of the cattle. Samuel, in turn, listened to her stories about the plants she collected, the medicines they could create, and the lessons her people had learned from living closely with nature. There was a constant exchange of knowledge, and with each lesson, the respect between them deepened. One afternoon, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Samuel and Iana found themselves sitting under the shade of a large oak tree. They were resting after a long day of work, the quiet sounds of the ranch surrounding them, the gentle lowing of the cattle, the rustle of grass in the breeze, and the occasional chirping of birds. Samuel leaned back against the tree, his hat tilted slightly to shield his eyes from the sun. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've worked on this land all my life, but I don't think I've ever stopped to really appreciate it the way I do now. Having someone to share it with, it changes things." Iana looked at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. She felt a warmth in her chest, a gentle acknowledgement that she too felt a shift. "I feel the same," she admitted softly. "I came here to learn, but I didn't expect to feel so connected, not just to the land but to the people and the work itself." Samuel smiled faintly, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "It's funny how that works. You think you're here to teach or to learn, and then you realize that both are happening at the same time." Iana nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction in that truth. She realized that this shared work, these small moments of cooperation and learning, were building something more than knowledge. They were building trust and understanding. The connection between them was not loud or dramatic, but it was steady, like the slow but sure growth of the grass in the fields. Over the next week, their bond strengthened through countless shared tasks. They mended fences together, often side by side, their hands working in harmony as they repaired posts and tightened wires. Samuel showed her how to read the behavior of the cattle, explaining which ones were curious, which were shy, and which needed special attention. Yana observed, asked questions, and sometimes offered insights based on her own experiences with animals and plants. One day, a sudden gust of wind blew through the pasture, scattering leaves and stirring the dust. A calf wandered dangerously close to the edge of the fence, and both Samuel and Yana moved quickly. Samuel guided the animal back with steady hands, while Yana helped secure the gate to prevent it from escaping. Afterward they paused, catching their breath, and looked at each other with relief and unspoken acknowledgement. These moments of collaboration, small as they were, strengthened their mutual respect. In the evenings after the work was done, they would often sit near the barn, talking quietly as the sky turned shades of pink and orange. Samuel shared stories of his family, the struggles and joys of ranch life, and the lessons he had learned over the years. Yana spoke of her people, their traditions, and the ways they had lived in harmony with the land for generations. Each story was a window into another world, and each moment of sharing brought them closer together. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the clear night sky, Samuel brought out an old notebook filled with sketches and notes about the ranch. He showed her diagrams of the fields, the placement of fences, and the layout of the pastures. Yana studied them carefully, impressed by the detail and thought that had gone into every decision. "You really think of everything," she said softly. Samuel chuckled. "I try. You learn quickly that the land doesn't forgive mistakes. If you're not careful, it will teach you in ways you'd rather avoid." Yana laughed quietly, shaking her head. "It's the same with plants. You make a mistake and the consequences can be immediate. There's no room for carelessness." They smiled at each other, recognizing the shared understanding that came from different experiences but similar respect for life and the world around them. The connection between them continued to grow, rooted in knowledge, trust, and the quiet joy of shared discovery. By the end of the week, Samuel noticed a subtle change in Yana. She moved more confidently through the pastures, spoke with a quiet assurance about the land, and even smiled more easily when joking with him. The small moments of laughter and shared work had built a comfort between them, a sense of camaraderie that made each day feel lighter and more meaningful. Yana, too, felt a shift within herself. She had come to the ranch seeking knowledge, but what she found was far more profound. She had found a mentor, a guide, and a friend, someone who respected her perspective and valued her presence. The subtle moments of connection, from shared laughter to quiet observation, had opened her heart to the beauty of learning not just about the land, but about life and human connection. As they finished another long day of work, Samuel and Yana stood together, looking out over the wide expanse of the ranch. The cattle grazed peacefully, the fences stood strong, and the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with warm hues of orange and pink. In that moment, both of them understood something unspoken. Their time together, brief as it might be, was leaving a lasting impression. It was a bond built not on words alone, but on shared effort, respect, and the subtle joy of learning from one another. Each day brought new lessons, new laughter, and new moments that quietly strengthened their connection. And though the future was uncertain, both Samuel and Yana knew that the experience would stay with them forever, a reminder of the power of shared work, understanding, and friendship. The days at the ranch had settled into a comfortable rhythm, but there was something new in the air. Samuel and Yana had grown accustomed to working together, sharing knowledge, and observing the land side by side. Yet what made this period special was the deeper connection forming between them, a bond built not just on work, but on understanding, trust, and the quiet exchange of their different worlds. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, Samuel suggested a break. "Let's sit over by the old barn for a while," he said. The barn was sturdy and spacious, with a small shaded area where they could rest. Yana followed, her basket of herbs swinging lightly on her arm. She had learned much about the ranch over the past week, how to check the fences, care for the calves, and even notice the subtle behavior of the cattle. But she was also eager to learn more about Samuel, the man who had so patiently shared his knowledge. They sat together on a wooden bench outside the barn, the warm air filled with the scents of hay, earth, and the fading heat of the day. Samuel leaned back, his hat tipped over his eyes, while Yana adjusted the basket beside her, her hands resting gently on her lap. For a few moments neither spoke, enjoying the peaceful silence. It was a rare and comforting stillness, one that allowed them to simply be in each other's presence without expectation. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "You know, I've spent my whole life here, but it's not until recently that I've truly thought about the history of this place. Not just my family's history, but what came before us. The people who lived here long before any ranch was built." Yana looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting curiosity and respect. "My people have always lived in these lands," she said softly. "We learned from the earth, from the animals, from the seasons. Everything we know comes from watching, listening, and respecting the world around us. I think it's similar to the way you work with the ranch." Samuel nodded, a small smile forming under his hat. "It is. Different methods, different tools, but the same idea. Respect, patience, and attention to what's around you." He paused, then gestured toward the fields. "I never realized how much I could learn from someone else's perspective. I've always thought I knew the land, but you've shown me ways to see it differently." Yana felt a quiet warmth at his words. It was one thing to teach and to share knowledge, but it was another to be respected for the knowledge she brought from her own culture. "I've learned so much from you too," she admitted. "About patience, about the work it takes to care for animals and land, and about the quiet ways people can connect with each other. You've shown me that even in small actions, there is meaning." For a while, they sat in companionable silence again, watching the shadows grow longer as the sun dipped lower. The wind carried a faint scent of wildflowers, and the distant lowing of cattle echoed across the fields. Samuel's gaze lingered on the horizon, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of calm that was deeper than any satisfaction from finishing a day's work. "You know," he said finally, "I never thought much about stories before. My family tells them, yes, but I always thought they were just for passing the time. Now I think they're more important than I realized. They connect us to the past, to the people who came before, and even to each other." Yana smiled, recognizing the significance of his words. "That's how my people see it too. Stories are not just words. They are lessons, guidance, and a way to honor what came before us. They help us understand who we are and how we belong in the world." Samuel turned his gaze to her, genuinely interested. "I'd like to hear some of your stories," he said. "If you're willing to share, I mean." Yana hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I will. There's one I think is important for this place." She began to speak slowly, her voice soft but steady, telling a tale of her ancestors who had lived on these lands for generations, learning to coexist with the animals, the plants, and the seasons. She spoke of lessons learned from the wind, the rivers, and the mountains, of the respect they paid to the earth, and of the wisdom passed down from elders to children. Samuel listened intently, absorbing every word. As the story unfolded, he realized how much of his own work resonated with these lessons. The careful attention to the land, the observation of animals, and the patience required to maintain the ranch were all connected to the traditions she described. He felt a deep respect for the knowledge and experience she brought, and for the way she shared it so thoughtfully. When she finished, there was a quiet pause. Samuel looked at her, a smile breaking across his face. "That was incredible. I've never thought about the land like that, not in such a full, meaningful way. You've given me a new perspective." Yana felt a gentle pride but also a humility. "I've only shared a small part," she said. "There's so much more to learn from you, from this land, and from everything around us." The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. They stood together, looking out over the vast expanse of the ranch, feeling a connection not just to the land, but to each other's experiences and understanding. Samuel realized that this was more than a lesson in ranching. It was a lesson in life, patience, and perspective. Yana realized that this was more than a learning opportunity. It was a chance to share her culture, her knowledge, and herself in a space that respected both. Over the following days, they continued this exchange. Samuel shared stories from his own family, tales of hardships and triumphs on the ranch, lessons learned from mistakes, and moments of joy. Yana listened, asked questions, and reflected on how his experiences echoed the principles she held dear in her own culture. She shared more stories, more lessons about plants, seasons, and the subtle wisdom of observing nature. Each conversation deepened their understanding of each other and of the land they both loved in their own ways. One afternoon, Samuel brought her to a quiet spot near the river that ran along the edge of the ranch. "This is where I like to think," he said. "When the work is done, I come here to watch the water, to listen to the wind, and to remember what matters." Yana sat beside him, feeling the cool breeze from the water on her face. She realized how similar this ritual was to what her ancestors had done, seeking connection with nature to understand life, to reflect, and to learn. They talked for hours that afternoon, not just about the land but about life, dreams, and values. Samuel spoke of the responsibility of caring for something larger than oneself, and Ayana shared how her people learned to live in harmony with the world around them. There was a quiet awe in these moments, a deep respect for the differences that brought them together and the similarities that connected them. By the time the sun had fully set, casting the world in soft shades of twilight, they stood and walked back to the ranch together. The air was cool, the sky dotted with stars, and the land around them seemed peaceful and alive. Samuel realized that these days of shared understanding, cultural exchange, and meaningful conversation had changed him. He felt more connected to the land, to the past, and to the possibilities of friendship and understanding across differences. Yana felt the same transformation. She had come to the ranch to learn about cattle and fences, but she had discovered something far more valuable: connection, respect, and the quiet joy of sharing knowledge with someone who truly listened. She had learned that understanding is built not only through words, but through attention, respect, and the willingness to see the world through another's eyes. As they prepared to part for the evening, Samuel looked at her with a calm, sincere expression. "Thank you for sharing so much with me," he said. "I've learned more than I expected, and I think I've changed a little because of it." Yana smiled softly. "And I've learned so much from you. Not just about ranching, but about patience, respect, and the importance of understanding each other. I'm grateful for this time." They parted with a gentle nod, each feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It had become a place of learning, connection, and understanding. The exchange of stories, the shared work, and the respect for each other's worlds had created a bond that was subtle but unbreakable. As the night settled over the plains, both Samuel and Ayana knew that their time together had left a lasting impression. The lessons of the land, the wisdom of their stories, and the connection they shared would remain with them, shaping how they saw the world and how they related to the people and land around them. It was a reminder that understanding and respect could bridge differences, and that even brief encounters could leave a profound mark on the heart and mind. The days had passed quickly on the ranch, and the time for Yana to leave had arrived. She had spent several weeks learning, observing, and sharing with Samuel, and each day had left its mark on both of them. The ranch, once just a place of work for Samuel, had transformed into a space of learning, reflection, and meaningful connection. For Ayanna, it had become a place where knowledge and friendship intertwined, where stories and lessons shaped not just her understanding of ranching, but of life itself. That morning, the sun rose softly, spreading a warm glow over the fields. The cattle were grazing peacefully, the fences stood strong, and the gentle rustle of the grass filled the air. Ayanna packed the herbs she had collected over the past weeks into her basket, carefully arranging them so they would stay safe during her journey. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of leaving yet also a sense of gratitude for everything she had experienced. Samuel approached her, his usual calm demeanor in place, but there was a subtle softness in his eyes that spoke of the bond they had formed. "You're leaving today," he said simply, though the statement carried more emotion than his words suggested. Ayanna nodded, placing the basket on the ground beside her. "Yes," she replied softly. "It's time to return home. But I won't forget what I've learned here, or the kindness you've shown me." Samuel smiled faintly, scratching the back of his neck. "You've left your mark here too, more than you know. The ranch feels different with your presence. Not just the work, but the way you see things, the care you put into everything. It's been a good change." Ayanna felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was one thing to learn, to gain knowledge, but it was another to feel that her presence had mattered. She looked down at the ground briefly, then back at Samuel, her dark eyes reflecting gratitude and quiet pride. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for teaching, for listening, and for sharing your stories. I've learned more than I could have imagined." They walked together to the edge of the ranch, where the trail led back toward the road she would take home. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry earth and wildflowers, and the distant hills seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. Samuel glanced at the land around them, as if seeing it anew through the eyes of someone who had just shared a meaningful connection. "You know," he said, breaking the quiet, "I think I'll remember this time for a long while. It's not every day someone comes into your life and changes the way you see things, even in small ways." Ayanna smiled softly. "And I'll remember it too," she said. "This place, your guidance, the stories, the work, it's all part of what I'll carry with me. Not just the knowledge, but the understanding, the patience, and the respect for the land and for each other." They paused for a moment, standing side by side, looking out at the expanse of the ranch. There was a shared silence, filled with unspoken words, gratitude, and the acknowledgement of a bond that had grown stronger over weeks of shared effort and learning. Samuel finally extended his hand in a gesture that was simple but meaningful. Ayanna took it, their handshake firm yet gentle, a physical acknowledgement of the connection they had formed. As she turned to leave, Ayanna glanced back at the ranch one last time. The wooden fences, the grazing cattle, the barns, all seemed more alive, more significant than when she had first arrived. She thought of the lessons learned, the laughter shared, and the quiet moments of understanding. She knew that this experience would remain with her forever, shaping how she approached her own life, her own people, and the world around her. Samuel watched her walk along the trail, feeling a mixture of pride, admiration, and a quiet sadness that such a meaningful connection was coming to an end. He realized that life often brought people together for brief periods, yet those periods could leave lasting impressions. He thought of the lessons she had taught him, about perspective, respect, and the quiet ways people could connect, and felt grateful for the change she had brought into his life. As Ayanna disappeared into the distance, Samuel returned to the ranch, carrying a sense of renewal. The land was still the same, the work still required attention, but he now approached it with a new perspective. The lessons of patience, observation, and understanding that had come from his time with Ayanna would influence how he managed the ranch, interacted with others, and viewed the world. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of orange, pink, and purple, Samuel walked through the fields, reflecting on the past weeks. He thought of the shared laughter, the small jokes, and the meaningful conversations. He remembered the way Ayanna had approached the land with respect, curiosity, and careful observation, and he felt a quiet sense of gratitude for her presence. The experience had reminded him of the importance of seeing the world through another person's eyes, and the value of patience and understanding. Ayanna, meanwhile, traveled home with a sense of fulfillment. Her basket of herbs was full, but even more significant was the wealth of knowledge, experience, and connection she carried in her heart and mind. She thought of Samuel's guidance, his stories, and the way he had shared not just his work but a part of himself. She realized that true learning was not just about facts or techniques. It was about understanding, respect, and the relationships that made knowledge meaningful. During her journey, she reflected on the lessons she had learned about the land, the animals, and the intricate balance of life. She also thought about the quiet bond she had formed with Samuel, a bond built on shared effort, mutual respect, and the willingness to see the world through each other's eyes. She knew that even though the distance between them would grow, the connection would remain, influencing her thoughts, decisions, and the way she approached her own work and relationships. Back at the ranch, Samuel finished his evening chores with a calm sense of purpose. He tended to the cattle, checked the fences, and walked the familiar paths of his land, but there was a subtle shift in his perspective. He noticed details he had overlooked before: the pattern of the clouds, the movement of the cattle, the whisper of the wind through the grasses. It was as if Ayanna's presence had taught him a new way to see the world, to appreciate the small moments, and to understand the deeper rhythms of life. As night fell and the stars appeared in the clear sky, both Samuel and Ayanna felt a quiet connection, invisible but unbroken. Their time together had been brief, but it had been filled with meaning, learning, and shared understanding. The lessons, stories, and experiences would remain with them, shaping their lives in subtle but profound ways. The ranch, bathed in moonlight, seemed peaceful and alive. Samuel stood at the edge of the pasture, looking at the vast horizon, and felt a sense of hope and continuity. Life moved forward, yet the moments of connection, understanding, and respect remained, echoing in the land and in their hearts. Ayanna, walking along the trail toward her home, felt a similar sense of peace. She had arrived at the ranch seeking knowledge, but she was leaving with something far greater: understanding, connection, and the memory of a person who had shown her that learning was not just about facts or work, but about seeing, listening, and respecting the world and those around you. In the days, weeks, and years to come, both Samuel and Ayanna would carry these memories with them. The ranch would continue to thrive under Samuel's care, and Ayanna would share the knowledge she had gained with her people. Yet the bond they had formed, the laughter shared, and the lessons learned would remain, a quiet but powerful reminder that even brief encounters could leave lasting impressions. Though distance separated them, their hearts and minds were connected by the experiences they had shared. They had learned that true understanding and respect could bridge differences, and that meaningful connections could form even in the simplest of circumstances. The ranch had been more than a place of work. It had been a place of growth, learning, and human connection. As the night deepened and the world grew quiet, both Samuel and Ayanna felt a sense of completeness. The ranch, the land, and their shared experiences had taught them lessons that would last a lifetime. They had discovered that the simplest moments, shared work, stories, laughter, and quiet reflection, could be the most meaningful, leaving a mark that time could not erase. And so, as the stars shimmered above the vast plains and the gentle wind whispered through the grasses, the story of their brief but profound connection came to a close. It was a story of learning, respect, understanding, and friendship, one that would live on in their hearts and memories forever.